Voilà. Good afternoon, all of you, and thank you very much for your presence, for you being here, for the delivery of the advisory opinion of the International Monsanto Tribunal. So I will first introduce a little bit what we did, and then I will give the floor to my different colleagues, because it's a collective work. We work together to deliver this, well, to prepare and then to deliver this opinion. And so each of us will introduce one of the questions. So the International Monsanto Tribunal is what we call an opinion tribunal, that you know. And an opinion tribunal is neither an ordinary court that falls within the judiciary order of a state. Is there a problem with the... OK, très bien. Comme ça, c'est OK? Parfait. I'm sorry, I'm not very excellent in that. So we are an opinion tribunal, not an ordinary court, not a court set up by an international organization. We are an extraordinary court, born out of the determination of civil society that takes the initiative and is actively involved in it. Opinion tribunals are tasked with examining, using a judicial method, the rule of law applicable to highly problematic events or situations which directly affects and are of serious concern to people or group of people, as well as society itself. Their objective is twofold. On the one hand, alerting public opinion and stakeholders to act considered as reprehensible under legal standards. On the other hand, so the two objectives, contributing to the progress of national and especially international law. So our tribunal, you know, we sat in The Hague in October 2016, and we were asked to examine the conformity of the activities of the Monsanto Corporation with rule and principle of international human rights law and humanitarian law. The tribunal was composed of 5 judges from Argentina, Eleanor Lam, from Belgium, sorry, myself, from Canada, where are you? Voilà, you're on my right hand, of course, Mexico, Jorge, and Senegal, by alphabetical order of country, you know, Dior. All of them are legal professional or practicing judge. And we were assisted, that's very important to recall, by Dr. Marcos Orellana, who is there, and as a registrar, and Chance Chaplain, where are you there at the end of the room? Chance Chaplain as deputy register. Monsanto officials, you know that, were invited to send their observation in writing and invite also to participate in the tribunal hearing to express their view on the issue. And however, and you know, officials from Monsanto turned up at the hearing. No official from Monsanto turned up at the hearing. And given the fact that Monsanto is advocating in dialogue, the tribunal really regrets their absence. Having said that, 6 detailed questions have been submitted to the tribunal, and they constitute what you call the terms of reference. And these terms of reference focus, respectively, on the right to a safe, clean, and healthy, sustainable environment. Question 1, and we will have presentation on these 6 questions. The right to food. Second, the right of the highest attainable standard of health. Question 3, freedom indispensable for scientific research. Question 4, alleged complicity in the commission of war crime in the context of the operation of the hand launched in Vietnam in 1962. Question 5, and question 6, crime of ecocide. The tribunal was not called upon to establish the possible criminal nor civil liability of Monsanto, nor did it have investigative powers. Rather, the tribunal role is to provide an advisory opinion on the question included in the term of reference and based on legal consideration. So the opinion delivered here in a few moments is a de jure and not a de facto opinion. Applicable law, just a few words about that. The standards upon which the tribunal based the present advisory opinion are contained mainly in the following United Nations instrument: the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, 16 December 1966, the International Covenant on Economic, Social and Cultural Rights, the same date, the Convention on the Right of the Child, 20 November 1989, and the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, 18 December 1979. These universal human treaties are envisaged in the light of the social responsibility of corporations as articulated by the guiding principle of business and human rights developed by the Special Representative of the UN Secretary General on the issue of human rights and transnational cooperation. And these guiding principles have been endorsed by the Human Rights Council in a resolution of 2011. So, by establishing human rights norms and values, this instrument provides important benchmarks against which corporate conduct can be measured. In this case, Monsanto as such, conduct was reported to have taken place. What is the tribunal procedure? The tribunal adopted the methods utilized by the International Court of Justice, here next door, in rendering advisory opinion. There is therefore in this procedure no plaintiff, no victim, no prosecutor, no defendant. Instead, there are legal questions requiring a legal interpretation of the tribunal. We receive before, during, and after the hearing a number of written submissions, legal briefs, reports, amicus curiae, written report of scientific experts. During the 2 days of the hearing, last October 2016, the tribunal heard 28 witnesses from various countries who refer to their experience concerning Monsanto activities, and they provide the tribunal with numerous documents. The tribunal has no reason to doubt the sincerity or the veracity of those who volunteer testify before it. But because their testimony was not given under oath or tested by cross-examination, and because also Monsanto declined to participate in the proceeding, the tribunal is not in a position to make findings on facts concerning the allegation of various misdeeds. Rather, the tribunal assumed that the facts and circumstances described by the witnesses would be proven. So, by giving the floor to the victims who have expressed themselves publicly, and by putting together a quite extensive documentary material, the tribunal hoped that he has helped in alerting the public, policymakers, and the media to the nature and the consequence of the often very disastrous consequence to human rights and the environment of the activities of Monsanto. Moreover, the tribunal has aimed to contribute, it hoped, to the progressive development of international human rights law by proposing new legal avenues for corporate accountability and new legal concepts. So, voilà for the introduction. I will not go further because time is flying. And now I will give the floor to the different colleagues to present one after another the conclusion, the position, the opinion of the tribunal. First question, right to healthy environment. And it will be presented by Marcos Orellana, Dr. Marcos Orellana, who was our registrar and who plays an important role in assisting the tribunal for delivery this opinion. Marcos, you have the floor. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Madam President. It has been for me an honor to act as registrar for this tribunal and to present today the tribunal's opinion on the first question posed to it. Did the firm Monsanto, by its activities, act in conformity with the right to a safe, clean, healthy, and sustainable environment as recognized in international human rights law? The starting point in the tribunal's analysis is the recognition of the fundamental character of the right to a healthy environment, its indissoluble linkage with human dignity, and these linkage and character can be traced back to the 1972 UN Conference on the Human Environment that took place in Stockholm, Sweden. This conference and the resulting declaration were able to place a narrative in the international community that underlies the linkages between a healthy environment and the human populations. It also led to a process of incubation of the right to a healthy environment in national constitutions, as well as the inception of the idea that the environment is a precondition for the enjoyment of all human rights. The first preambular paragraph of the Stockholm Declaration states that, and I quote, "Both aspects of man's environment, the natural and the man-made, are essential to his well-being and to the enjoyment of basic human rights, even to life itself," end of quote. As noted, this proclamation affirms the fundamental character of the right to a healthy environment. Since this conference, environmental protection has been elaborated in the internal laws of countries around the world. It has been seen as a categorical imperative that has led to institutional and normative developments. One of the most important of these developments is the so-called environmental rights revolution. It is the process whereby countries began to amend their national constitutions to insert references to the right to a healthy environment. Back in 1994, the special rapporteur of the subcommission on the prevention of discrimination identified more than 60 national constitutions that contained references to the right to a healthy environment. In 2011, the Office of the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights prepared a detailed analytical study that identified more than 140 countries devoting constitutional provisions to the environment. This element of state practice, the widespread recognition of the right to a healthy environment in national constitutions, evidences the crystallization of this right as an element of international customary law, including on account of its fundamental norm-creating character. The UN High Commissioner has highlighted this development by noting that and I quote, "The increasing constitutional recognition of environmental rights and responsibilities globally reflects growing awareness of the importance of environmental values and greater acceptance of a right to a healthy environment." I wish to underscore this point. Widespread state practice leading to an international norm of custom that recognizes the right to a healthy environment in international law. If the right to a healthy environment is established in the law, what is its content? What does it require? And this is a place where the tribunal found guidance in the work of the Special Rapporteur on Human Rights and the Environment that has been reporting to the Human Rights Council. The Special Rapporteur on Human Rights and the Environment has elaborated reports that map international human rights obligations as they relate to a healthy, safe, and sustainable environment. In response, the Human Rights Council has recognized that, and I quote, "Human rights law sets out certain obligations on states that are relevant to the enjoyment of a safe, clean, healthy, and sustainable environment." End of quote. More specifically, the Special Rapporteur has identified procedural and substantive dimensions to this right. Procedural dimensions include the possibility of enabling a societal dialogue on environmental policy, access to information, participation, access to justice in environmental matters. They all provide the platform upon which a society can meaningfully address the environmental threats that it is facing. At the same time, there are substantive obligations that sustain an environmental quality that is conducive to a life of dignity. This substantive dimension of the right to a healthy environment directly links with the conditions that enable a healthy planet, such as clean water, air, and soils, a balanced climate system, and healthy and diverse ecosystems. This is the Tribunal's analysis of the applicable law, the crystallization of an international norm of custom that recognizes the right to a healthy environment. The Tribunal also heard a number of testimonies and received evidence on Monsanto's conduct in relation to these rights. It heard various witnesses account for the impacts on the environment and human health regarding Monsanto's activities. These issues included impacts on soils and plants, impacts on animal health, impacts on biodiversity, impacts on farmers, impacts on scientific researchers. These various impacts directly and indirectly affect the right to a healthy environment. The tribunal concludes that Monsanto's conduct has negatively affected the right to a healthy environment. Monsanto has engaged in practices that have serious and negative environmental impacts. These impacts have affected countless individuals and communities in many countries, as well as the health of the environment itself, with its consequent impact on plants, animals, and biodiversity. For example, Monsanto produces and aggressively markets Roundup, an herbicide whose key ingredient is glyphosate, in addition to other dangerous chemicals. Monsanto has also patented genetically engineered organisms and seeds that are tolerant to glyphosate. The design and proliferation of this herbicide and GMO seeds has led to the increased consumption of these products with its concomitant impact on the environment. While the World Health Organization's International Agency for Research on Cancer has concluded that glyphosate is carcinogenic, Monsanto has continued to produce and market glyphosate-containing herbicides. Glyphosate not only affects human health, however. The use of glyphosate also negatively affects aquatic ecosystems and organisms. It poses a threat to fish and reproductive systems. It results in acute toxicity. It has adverse effects on soil health, reducing soil fertility and the diversity of microorganisms. It also leads to the compacting of soils, which in turn leads to flooding and erosion. Since glyphosate is also often spread by aerial means, it inevitably results in the contamination of untargeted crops, such as the witnesses that spoke of cacao being affected in Colombia, for example. So in the end, the impact of Monsanto's conduct on biodiversity has also negatively affected the rights of indigenous peoples and local communities. These impacts are all the more grave given the close dependency of indigenous peoples and local communities on the environment. The lack of information on risks posed by herbicides, of risks posed by genetically modified organisms, the lack of adequate mitigation measures, the lack of credible environmental impact assessments, and the lack of meaningful consultations, they all further underscore Monsanto's interference with the right to a healthy environment. Thank you, Madam President.
Thank you very much, Marcos. Thank you a lot. You know where... Sorry, well, we use English this afternoon just for the presentation, for the sake of the interpretation, but after for the question we'll use different languages, so but that's for the sake of interpretation, and already because otherwise I will forget. Thank you very much in advance for your help. You are there in the booth, so many thanks. Now I will give the floor to Eleonora. Eleonora, we work together to all the questions, but you know, some of them prepare more specially. And so Jorge Fernandez, Souza was there, and Eleonora took specially into consideration the question 2, the right to food. Eleonora will present it. You have the floor, Eleonora.
Thank you very much. Well, I feel very honored to be here in this tribunal, and I'm going to explain question number 2 regarding the right to food. And the question is, did the firm Monsanto by its activities act in conformity with the right to food as recognized in international human rights law? The right to food is firmly established in international law as a fundamental right. Both for individuals and communities and business entities have a clear responsibility to respect it. The international norms, in addition to the linkages between the right to food and the right to life, health, and a healthy environment, support an interpretation of the right to food that cannot be restrictive or narrow. The right to food cannot be understood simply as the right to eat or to feed. It comprehends the chance to feed properly and sufficiently, healthily and permanently. in addition to being understood as the possibility of producing food for consumption or for marketing, or as the possibility of obtaining and accessing food also in a permanent and sustainable way. During our hearings in October 2016, the Tribunal heard various witnesses account for impacts on the right to food resulting from Monsanto's activities. The testimonies reveal that in all cases there has been an infringement of the right to food suffered by the witnesses as well as by the communities and persons referred to by the witnesses. As reported to us, Monsanto's activities have negatively affected food availability for individuals and communities and have interfered with the ability of individuals and communities to feed themselves directly from productive land. Monsanto's activities have caused and are causing damages to the soil, water, and generally to the environment, thereby interfering with the ability of many communities to produce adequate food. Communal agricultural systems, as well as forests that provide food resources, are being devastated by the spread of genetically engineered seeds that depend upon large amounts of herbicides like glyphosate. In this way, Monsanto's activities interfere with the right to produce food. Monsanto is also interfering with the right to food by denying peasants access to the seeds they need. As GMO seeds begin to dominate markets, non-GMO seeds are being withdrawn, leading to decreased seeds choice. Moreover, GMO seeds are not always affordable to small farmers and may only be available to large business entities. This is why this tribunal considers that the use of GMOs all around the world is undermining the ability of farmers to access seeds and damaging agricultural production by communities. This situation is also affecting food sovereignty, which implies priorities of people's rights to food and food production rather than corporate interest. Farmers also fall prey to Monsanto's aggressive and misleading tactics and find themselves forced to buy seeds every year, having lost the ability to save their own. Then, the spread of GMO seeds by Monsanto has clearly interfered with the ability to practice agriculture according to their traditional cultural practices. That is why this tribunal considers that a non-commercial seed system must exist and must expand, ensuring that farmers have the ability to preserve their traditional knowledge. Monsanto's activities has also threatened biodiversity, as an increasing number of farmers use exactly the same GMO seeds and grow exactly the same monocrops. By reducing crop biodiversity and local plants, Monsanto has interfered with the right to food and is moreover aggravating the risks of food security and undermining the resilience of local food production systems. Other important rights closely connected to the right to food are property rights, which have also been affected by Monsanto's activities. First, because of the cost of dealing with genetic contaminations of land and plants, which can deny farmers the right to sell their products as GMO-free. Second, by forcing farmers to pay royalties to Monsanto. Furthermore, Monsanto has aggressively pursued intimidation tactics that have damaged the fabric of communities and caused considerable anxiety and stress. In this connection, this tribunal agrees that seed patents are in contradiction with the principle of human right to food, which guarantees access to nutrition, the basic need for every human to exist. Even intellectual property rights should be rightfully respected when companies are taking hold of sources of nutrition should be under closer scrutiny. This tribunal considers that today's dominant agro-industrial model is highly problematic, not only because it is dependent on dangerous chemicals, but also due to its negative effects on climate change, its impact on the loss of biodiversity, and because it undermines food sovereignty. A rise in organic agricultural practices in many places illustrates that farmers with less or without pesticides, herbicides, and other dangerous chemicals is feasible. Studies have indicated that agroecology is capable of delivering sufficient yields to feed the entire world population and ensure that people are adequately nourished. And this sustainable approach of agriculture is being put further out of reach day by day by the practices and products Monsanto aggressively promotes. Thank you very much, Mr. President.
Thank you, Eleonora. Thank you very much for the presentation of the right to food. Now we are moving to the question 3. The question 3 is about the right to health. And for this question, we have also two rapporteurs, Jorge Fernandez Souza and Eleonora. And so I will give the floor to you again, Eleonora. Sorry for that, but we have to follow the order of the questions. So if you still have some energy to continue, okay?
Yes, perfect.
So,
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Well, the question regarding the right to food is, did the firm Monsanto, by its activities, act in conformity with the right to food, the right to the highest attainable standard of health, as recognized in international human rights law? The right to health is firmly established in international human rights law and has direct links not only with the right to life, but also with rights that enable health, such as the right to food, water and sanitation, and a healthy environment. According to the World Health Organization, health not only has a physical dimension, but also spiritual and social dimensions. In that regard, the human right to health encompasses the socio-economic conditions in which people can live a healthy life. Moreover, the right to health extends to the underlying determinants of health, such as food and nutrition, housing, access to safe and potable water, healthy working conditions, and the environment. Therefore, interference with any of these underlying determinants of health may offend the right to health. During our hearings in October 2016, this tribunal heard various witnesses account for impacts on human health resulting from Monsanto's activities. These testimonies describe situations that point to Monsanto's responsibility for abuses in respect of the right to health. According to the testimonies, Monsanto's activities have not only negatively affected the physical health of individuals and communities. Monsanto's conduct has also interfered with the mental health of countless individuals and communities around the world. Moreover, Monsanto's activities have had a negative impact on the realization of the underlying factors of the right to health, including access to adequate and safe food and water, as well as the enjoyment of a healthy environment. As I will describe shortly below, Monsanto has actively employed dangerous substances, including polychlorinated biphenyls, also known as PCBs, glyphosate, and GMOs that allegedly interfere with the enjoyment of the right to health. Regarding PCBs, the United States Environmental Protection Agency, EPA, gathered evidence for potential carcinogenic effects. It demonstrated that the health implications of exposure to PCBs are extremely serious. There is also a range of non-cancerous health effects reported by EPA, such as negative impacts on fertility, child development, and the immune system. For a certain time, Monsanto was the primary and only manufacturer in the USA of PCBs. Despite the knowledge regarding its serious health impacts, for many years Monsanto produced and marketed PCBs affecting the right to health. Regarding glyphosate, Monsanto produces and markets throughout the world Roundup, an herbicide which key ingredient is glyphosate, as Marcos described below. Monsanto sells an enormous amount of herbicides and also invented GMO seeds that are resistant to glyphosate and are therefore suitable for use with Roundup. This design allows farmers to spread the herbicide but not damaging those crops that are genetically modified to tolerate glyphosate. The proliferation of these glyphosate-resistant GMO seeds has led to an increase in the use of glyphosate-containing herbicides. In March 2015, glyphosate was declared probably carcinogenic to humans by WHO's International Agency for Research on Cancer. It also observed that non-Hodgkin's lymphoma and other hematopoietic cancers are the cancers most associated with glyphosate exposure. a review of all studies on glyphosate conducted by Brazilian researchers corroborated the report and findings of the International Agency for Research on Cancer, asserting the genotoxicity of glyphosate on humans. This tribunal does not ignore a report by the European Food Safety Authority that concludes that glyphosate is not a carcinogenic substance. The United States Environmental Protection Agency, EPA, has also issued a report in September 2016 that concluded that glyphosate was not likely carcinogenic to humans. But in a report released in March 2017, some of the panel members who reviewed the research disagreed with EPA's conclusion. These panelists note several considerations, including that while the majority of the individual studies are not statistically significant, combining the results using meta-analysis shows a scientifically important and statistically significant elevated non-Hodgkin's lymphoma risk that is relevant for understanding carcinogenic potential. This tribunal does also not ignore that in an opinion on the harmonized classification for glyphosate delivered in March 2017, the European Chemicals Agency Committee for Risk Assessment has concluded that the available scientific evidence did not meet the criteria to classify glyphosate as a carcinogen. But it should be stressed that this classification is based solely on the hazardous properties of the substance, is that not take into account the likelihood of exposure to the substance and therefore does not address the risk of exposure. As it will be explained in the next question by my colleague, this tribunal is very concerned about the independence of the studies. International Monsanto documents released in March 2017 as a result of a court order of the U.S. District Court of California, San Francisco, show that the Monsanto's long-standing claims about the safety of its top-selling Roundup herbicide do not rely on sound science, as the company asserts, but on efforts to manipulate the science. Therefore, we can say that the scientific controversy about the cancer risk associated to glyphosate may be over. In light of the evidence and considering the risks and negative impacts resulting from glyphosate, this tribunal considers that Monsanto's conduct has offended the right to health. Regarding GMOs, there is an absence of scientific consensus about the direct harmfulness of GMOs on human health. But at the same time, independent scientists and policy analysts have expressed the concern that relevant risk assessment and safety testing are not being carried out for GMOs for several reasons. These reasons include the inadequate design of regulatory frameworks, their dependence on company data, the lack of transparency in the process, and the inability of independent researchers to conduct their safety studies. These concerns are further amplified by studies that show a strong statistical association between scientific authors' professional connections to the biotechnology, industry, and research findings that were favorable to transgenic food products. Although the scientific question of GMO toxicity on human health remains open, it is important to stress that in light of the concerns regarding inadequate risk assessment for GMOs, there is no political consensus on the cultivation of GMOs. Furthermore, the spread of GMO crops has dramatically increased the amount of pesticide and herbicide usage per hectare in recent years, and contributed to the spread of glyphosate-resistant weeds. In that sense, it has been shown that by exposing communities and individuals to the higher risk of increased pesticide and herbicide use, the GMOs have indirect impacts on health. As a manufacturer and marketer of GMO seeds that increase the use of glyphosate, then this tribunal considers that Monsanto has engaged in practices that have had a negative impact on human health. Thank you very much.
Now we turn to question 4. And question 4 is concerned by the freedom indispensable for scientific research. And you already refer to that, and so I will give the floor to Stephen Schreibman, who will explain to you our position concerning this important subject. You have the floor, Stephen.
Thank you very much. So question 4 asks this question: did the firm Monsanto act by its activities in conformity with the freedom indispensable for scientific research as guaranteed by Article 15, subsection 3 of the International Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights, as well as the freedoms of thought and expression guaranteed in Article 19 of the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, taking into account the responsibilities imposed on corporations by the guiding principles on business and human rights as endorsed by the Human Rights Council. So first I'm going to begin with a word or two about the covenants and the international legal principles they engender, and then talk about the conclusions that we arrived at having heard the testimony that was presented before the tribunal. As we know, objective and unbiased scientific research provides critical and necessary information about environmental risks, information that communities and individuals need so they can take measures, including preventative measures, to protect their health, the environment, and their community. Thus, this freedom indispensable to scientific research safeguards other rights as well, such as the right to health, food, water, and a healthy environment, of course. The freedom indispensable for scientific research also engenders the right of free expression and its corollary, the right to information, the right to know what's in our environment and what we're being exposed to and what all of that may mean in terms of health and our well-being. These rights find explicit protection in Article 19 of the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, which recognizes, and I quote, the right to hold opinions without interference, the right to freedom of expression, but also the freedom to seek, receive, and impart information and ideas of all kinds. This right to information is also underscored by the UN Guiding Principles on Business and Human Rights, which include the responsibility for business enterprises to, I quote again, provide information that is sufficient to evaluate the adequacy of an enterprise's response to the particular human rights involved, close quote. So in other words, according to these human rights standards, scientists must be free to express their opinions and publish their research, and the public has a corresponding right to be informed by and about them. Observance of these rights is particularly important in areas where the impacts of science and technological advances are controversial and may be harmful. The freedom is even more important when what were once public research functions have been privatized, as has happened in many Western countries, so that the research project is now carried out by corporations and other private entities that have become the principal producers and or funders of scientific research. And as we also know, the problem of ensuring public access to reliable and objective science has recently become particularly acute with the election of political leaders who have little, if any, regard for fact or reality-based advocacy or decision-making. Inconvenient truths about climate change are simply dismissed as fake news, while information gathering and scientific investigation is abandoned, as of course is any requirement for transparent environmental assessment processes. In fact, as many of you may know, groups around the world are taking, as we meet, the extraordinary step of caching climate change data collected by US agencies, NASA, NOAA, and the EPA, for fear that that collection of data will actually be deleted by agents of the Trump administration. Now the evidence, or the testimony is the better term. For the most part, the particular testimony that we heard that considered this particular question was offered by and about scientists in academia, in government, and in the private sector, some of whom have reaped the whirlwind for having the temerity to publish or make public their investigations of Monsanto products. The consistent picture they presented was of a company, Monsanto, that routinely employed dishonest, deceptive, and non-transparent tactics to gain approval for its genetically engineered crops and their associated herbicides. Monsanto was accused of operating through surrogates to discredit and shut down scientific research and debate that threatened its commercial interests. It was accused of promoting weak regulatory processes, and it was accused as well of using bullying and illicit tactics to pressure countries to permit the marketing of its products. The obvious result of all this being that sound scientific inquiry and debate is undermined and silenced, and the public is denied critical information about the likely or possible adverse impacts of certain products and practices, information they need to protect the community, the environment, and their well-being. Our conclusion. The conduct attributed to Monsanto, if proven, is in the view of the tribunal entirely incompatible with the freedom indispensable to scientific research, including both the freedom of expression as well as the right to information guaranteed by the covenants we've been asked to consider, and the guidelines that apply to corporate conduct. Of course, such an infringement of these freedoms is all the more problematic given the risks to health and the environment posed by Monsanto's products. Where scientists do not enjoy the freedom necessary to carry out their work, society lacks the tools necessary to safeguard fundamental rights. There are too many examples of corporations deliberately obfuscating scientific findings or attacking scientists in order to spread false information and confusion in society, such as about tobacco, climate change, various chemical products, in order to discourage society from taking measures of protection. Of course, free expression is a two-way street, and there are those who will argue that we shouldn't interfere with Monsanto's right to market its products. But there is a clear difference between making claims where legitimate scientific uncertainties exist and taking direct steps to silence or discredit scientists where their findings are not convenient to a particular business model. The latter situation crosses the boundary of what can be considered legitimate public debate. It involves conduct that frustrates the scientific project and that is intended to undermine and silence scientists. In our view, that conduct offends and cannot be reconciled with the freedom indispensable for scientific research and to the freedom of expression, including the right to access information critical to protect health, well-being, and the environment. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephen. Thank you, Stephen. That was for question 4, so about the indispensable freedom on scientific research. Now, if you allow, we will turn into the question 5. The question 5 was about war crime complicity and Agent Orange. So, Jörg Fernandez, Souza, and Dior and myself, we were to get a rapporteur for this question, and I will make here the presentation. So the question is the following one. Could the firm Monsanto be held complicit in the commission of a war crime as defined in Article 8, Paragraph 2 of the Statute of the International Criminal Court by providing materials to the United States Army in the context of Operation, under bracket, Ranch Hand, launched in Vietnam 1962. So, first point, the international legal framework concerning war crime. The 1998 Home Status of the International Criminal Code, the ICC, is the key text of international criminal law that specifies the cases in which a war crime can be said to exist. Article 8 of the Rome Statute lists all the crimes which fall into the category of war crimes within the jurisdiction of the ICC. This provision defines and lays down a strict competency framework stemming from a concept of war crime specific to the court. But as defined in the Rome Statute, war crimes do not involve the criminal liability of a legal person, because Article 8, Paragraph 2 applies only to natural persons as possible perpetrators of such crime within the meaning of and in accordance with Article 1 and 25 of the Statute. In this respect, and concerning the legal framework, the Tribunal deems that it would be welcome to include in the Rome Statute not only natural persons who may commit war crime, but also enterprises or companies themselves that contribute through their products to the commission of war crimes. This inclusion of legal person responsibility in the Rome Statute could be done in the same way as Article 27 and 28 on the Statute, which relate to those acting in an official capacity and to the responsibility of commanders and other superiors. So first point about the legal framework. The second point is about the Vietnam War and the Agent Orange. Since the early 60s and until 1973, more or less, the United States waged in the war in Vietnam, in which the armed forces used Agent Orange, manufactured by the Monsanto company, in addition to military means and weapons. This herbicide and defoliating chemical, with its dioxin component, was sprayed on Vietnamese forests to destroy the habitat and the natural shelter of the Viet Cong and the North Vietnamese troops and prevent ambush. Having come into use starting from 1962 as part of the Operation Ranch Hand, it is estimated that until 1971, more than 70 million liters of Agent Orange were spread on approximately 2.6 million hectares. Several studies have shown that the use of Agent Orange has caused severe harm to health among larger segments of the Vietnamese civilian population, in particular deformities as well as prenatal and postnatal death. In addition to human suffering, the spraying of Agent Orange caused widespread harm to the environment during this year by deforestation. Yes, it's okay. Harm caused to human health by the use of Agent Orange also affected members of the military forces that fought in Vietnam. In 1984, several hundred of former combatants of the US, New Zealand, and Australian Armed Force consequently filed an action against several chemical companies, including the Monsanto company who manufactured the herbicide Agent Orange, concerning the harm to their health, which they claim to have suffered due to the proximity of that herbicide during the war. The 7 chemical companies defendants, among which Monsanto, subsequently agreed to pay collectively a total of $180 million or US dollar, of course an adequate amount given the harm caused by which pointed, however, to their responsibility. Now the third question about the complicity in war crime. Concerning Monsanto's possible complicity in war crime, no relevant evidence has been provided before the tribunal on that question. Against this background, the tribunal cannot make any definitive finding regarding war crime complicity. Nevertheless, taking into consideration the historic fact of damage to the population of Vietnam and even to US veterans and their allies, and of destruction of the environment, the tribunal deems that force should be given to the hypothesis that relevant evidence was available regarding the fact that Monsanto provided A, the means for the US campaign in Vietnam, knew how its product would be used, and had information on the damaging effects to the health and the environment. Finally, the tribunal is on the view that would the crime of ecocide, that you are going to speak in a few minutes, be included in the Rome Statute and encompass environmental crimes as a fifth international crime, it could address those acts as destruction of the environment committed in Vietnam. So for question 5. And Jörg Fernandez Souza and Jörg also and myself, we were together on that. I'm just here presenting the question. So now we are moving to question 6. And question 6, Marcos, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam President. Question 6, in the terms of reference on ecocides, reads as follows. Could the past and present activities of Monsanto constitute a crime of ecocide understood as causing serious damage or destroying the environment so as to significantly and durably alter the global commons or ecosystem services upon which certain groups rely? The starting point in the analysis of this question by way of background takes note that the Swedish Prime Minister opening the UN Conference on the Human Environment back in 1972 spoke of the Vietnam War as an ecocide. As this tribunal observed in relation to the right to a healthy environment, this conference succeeded in placing a narrative in the human consciousness regarding the fundamental importance of environmental issues for human well-being. In light of this narrative and expanding awareness regarding the interconnections between humans and nature, the international community began exploring ways in which the law could be used to safeguard essential environmental processes and ecosystems. Internal law began to develop, and a whole body of criminal law was enacted in order to provide environmental protection. The inclusion of environmental crimes in domestic criminal statutes gave expression to the principle of criminal law of ultima ratio, whereby the stigma of criminal sanctions attaches to conduct that offends values that underlie the possibility of societal coexistence. The fundamental value of environmental protection as enabling life on the planet and human well-being fully justifies the imposition of criminal sanctions for conduct resulting in serious environmental harm. International environmental instruments also began to use criminal sanctions to deter conduct offensive to the environment. For example, in order to address the negative impacts of cross-border movement of hazardous wastes, the Basel Convention on the Transboundary Movement of Hazardous Wastes and Their Disposal of 1989 set up a system of controls to prevent harm. Notably, this convention establishes that illegal shipments of hazardous wastes are an international crime. Similar provisions were adopted in respect of ozone-depleting substances and illegal wildlife trade, among others. The use of criminal sanctions, therefore, confirms the increased awareness of how environmental harm negatively affects the fundamental values of society. The international community today understands that preserving the integrity of ecosystems and a healthy environment is vital to enable society and secure a life of dignity for present and future generations. Therefore, attacks against the health and integrity of the environment are unethical human conducts and subject to criminal opprobrium. International criminal law takes these ideas forward and took these ideas forward in the 20th century by addressing the most serious crimes. For example, Geneva Protocol 1, additional to the Geneva Conventions of 1949 and relating to the protection of victims of international armed conflicts of 1977, contains certain provisions that concern the environment. Similarly, the Convention on the Prohibition of Military or any other hostile use of environmental modification techniques addresses the environment as a tool of war. The 1998 Rome Statute of the International Criminal Court contemplates long-term, widespread, and severe environmental harm as a war crime, and its definition of crimes against humanity could also be used to address egregious conduct resulting in serious environmental harm. The prosecutor of the International Criminal Court in 2006 announced that it, and I quote, will give particular consideration to prosecuting Rome Statute crimes that are committed by means of or that result in the destruction of the environment, the illegal exploitation of natural resources, or the illegal disposition of land, end of quote. Despite the patchwork of international norms protecting the environment through criminal sanctions, environmental law, and criminal law, their gaps remain. International law has yet to articulate in precise terms criminal responsibility for the crime of ecocide, whether committed in times of peace or in the context of armed conflict. Second point, the elements of the crime. The term ecocide appears to have been first publicly used in 1970 by Arthur Galston, a plant biologist whose research led to the invention of Agent Orange, as described, a toxic herbicide sprayed by the United States in its war against Vietnam. Speaking in Washington, D.C. in 1970, he understood this crime as, and I quote, devastation and destruction which aim at damaging or destroying the ecology of geographic areas to the detriment of all life, whether human, animal, or plant, end of quote. The terms of reference of this tribunal understand the crime of ecocide as causing serious damage or destroying the environment so as to significantly and durably alter the global commons or ecosystem services upon which certain groups rely. This is the actus rea, or the material conduct that arises in the crime of ecocide. In addition to this material conduct, these elements, the crime of ecocide also involves general criminal elements, including knowledge and intent, so-called mens rea, complicity, and corporate criminal responsibility. In terms of knowledge and intent, the crime of ecocide does not require the perpetrator to have the specific intent to destroy the environment. Rather, this tribunal finds guidance in the Rome Statute, which articulates tests to identify intent and knowledge. According to the Rome Statute, an individual acts intentionally when that person means to engage in the conduct, or that person means to cause the consequences, or is aware that those consequences will occur in the ordinary course of events. This in terms of mens rea. In terms of complicity, the UN Guiding Principles on Business and Human Rights explains that the weight of international criminal law jurisprudence indicate that the relevant standard for aiding and abetting is knowingly providing practical assistance or encouragement that has substantial effect on the commission of a crime. And then thirdly, whereas the Rome Statute relates to the individual criminal responsibility of natural persons, this tribunal observes that there is no conceptual or normative obstacle to holding a corporation criminally responsible for an international crime. This responsibility of the corporation is separate from the responsibility of the legal officers that may have been involved in the conduct. The tribunal is of the view that the time is ripe for proposing this new legal concept of ecocide and to integrate it into an amended version of the Rome Statute, establishing the International Criminal Court. In that regard, ecocide is different from and cannot be assimilated to the forms of genocide that are currently contemplated by the Rome Statute or by the 1948 Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide. Finally, the third point is in relation to Monsanto's conduct in relation to ecocide. If the crime of ecocide were recognized in international criminal law, which is not the case at the time being, the activities of Monsanto could possibly constitute a crime of ecocide as causing substantive and lasting damages to biodiversity and ecosystems, affecting the life and the health of human population. This assessment is based in particular on the following conduct allegedly imputable to Monsanto: manufacture and supply and aerial application of concentrated mixes of glyphosate herbicide used by the United States and Colombian governments in implementing Plan Colombia, whose negative impacts has been documented and evidenced in the testimonies presented to the tribunal. Second, large-scale use of dangerous agrochemicals in industrial agriculture. Third, engineering, production, introduction, and release of genetically engineered crops. Fourth, severe contamination of plant diversity, soils, and waters. Fifth and last, the introduction of a persistent organic pollutant, PCBs, into the environment, causing widespread, long-lasting, and severe environmental harm. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Now we're approaching to the end, but not yet. As you see, the advisory opinion is structured in three parts. The introductory part section details the condition within which the tribunal was initiated. So this tribunal, an opinion tribunal convened by civil society to clarify the legal obligation and consequences of some of the activities of the Monsanto company. The middle part of the middle section of the advisory opinion examines the 6 questions. So the 6 questions that we discussed, the question posed to the tribunal. And now the final section. The final section is looking at the broader picture and tackles the growing gap between international human rights law and corporate accountability. Stephen, you have the floor for that.
Thank you once again. The tribunal's view is that any consideration of Monsanto's obligations under international human rights and environmental law has to acknowledge, as the chair just indicated, the severe disparity that now exists between those obligations on the one hand and the rights and entitlements that Monsanto now enjoys under international trade and investment law on the other. Those rights, as opposed to responsibilities, are a consequence of the radical advance of corporate rights and entitlements under the World Trade Organization and a variety of bilateral and multilateral trade agreements, including the one that the European Commission just concluded with Canada, one that was underway when Donald Trump was elected with the United States. I'm not sure what the status of that particular initiative is. There's the Trans-Pacific Partnership. There are various proposals for free trade agreements with China, and there are a myriad of international investment treaties at last count, I think numbering more than 3,000. I happen to be in Europe at the time, at this moment, and any European country will have any number of these, probably dozens, of international investment treaties with various countries around the world, in Africa and South America and everywhere where their investors have interests. And these treaties exist to protect those investment interests. Under these trade regimes, products such as those developed and marketed by Monsanto are considered goods, but they also engender investments, and they also are related to the provision of services. So as such, they are subject to binding trade rules concerning the trade in goods, trade in services, and as mentioned, international investment disciplines as well, all of which severely constrain the capacity of states at all levels of government to establish or maintain policies, laws, and practices needed to protect human rights or the environment. Moreover, the trade and investment agreements that I'm describing have come equipped with extraordinary and powerful tools for asserting and defending those commercial interests. Thus, foreign investors have been accorded the unilateral right to invoke binding investor-state dispute resolution. Some of you will know of this by the acronym ISDS, to claim damages for violations of the broadly framed rights they now enjoy under these treaties. Given our concerns today, it is important to note that foreign investors have no reciprocal or other obligation whatsoever under these agreements, which they have been given the unilateral right to enforce, by claiming damages against governments for having taken actions that are entirely lawful within the legal and constitutional framework of that nation. Truly an extraordinary development in international law. The codification of such private rights creates an obvious and serious impediment to the realization of human and environmental rights. Treaty-based investor rights are now being asserted in a manner that clearly undermines the capacity of nations to fulfill current international human rights obligations. And there has been a virtual explosion of these cases as the lawyers representing transnational corporations understand what a phenomenal gift they've been given in this very powerful remedy to assert their clients' interests. Fundamentally, it is essential in the tribunal's view that human and environmental rights be accorded primacy in any conflict with trade or investment rights. And that is certainly not taking place now when these issues are adjudicated by tribunals that are at best, ill-equipped to consider them. And the disputes that often proceed before these tribunals clearly engender issues of fundamental importance from a human rights point of view. If we fail to give human rights the primacy they deserve in these contests, the gap will only continue to grow between the protection of corporate interests and the protection of human rights, biodiversity, and environment, and the environment on the short end of the stick. There is therefore an urgent need for human rights bodies to address these problems if corporations like Monsanto are to be accountable for the conduct that harms health, the environment, and biodiversity. There's one last issue we want to explore, and that has to do with the fact that the effectiveness of international human rights instruments and the limited effectiveness of those instruments when we're talking about a private company arise from the general view that obligations under these international human rights instruments have no direct application to non-state actors. However, the need to expand the application of international human rights law to private entities, such as transnational corporations, including Monsanto, has been acknowledged by many expert commentators and for some time. And this tribunal deems that the need for such reform is indisputable. Similar reforms are now necessary to ensure that international financial institutions, international bodies such as the World Trade Organization and UN bodies as well, adhere to and are accountable for non-compliance with norms of international human rights law. While corporate codes of conduct have been promulgated by various institutions, including the code that I addressed in responding to the issue in question 4, they're voluntary and they're unenforceable. Yet whether the allegations of misconduct directed at Monsanto are borne out or not, it is patently clear that corporations are capable of, and indeed have often interfered with, the enjoyment of a broad range of human rights. Nevertheless, corporations are largely immune to liability for such violations, and their victims most often remain without any redress whatsoever. This is because, while according companies like Monsanto unprecedented rights and entitlements, international law has failed woefully to impose any corresponding obligation to impose on them an obligation to protect human rights and the environment. So it is beyond the scope of this advisory opinion to consider the breadth of reforms required to realign the respective priorities of commercial and public interests that must be brought about under international law. What the tribunal can do is to strongly encourage authoritative bodies to address the legal and practical limitations that currently confine the scope and content and ultimately the effectiveness of international human rights law. And we must whatever influence we exert whatever influence we have to encourage them to do so. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Stephen. Voilà, the presentation is over. Thank you for your patience, because it's more than 1 hour, but well, the report is a very long one, of course, and the questions were so important, sensitive and sensible, so we had to try to explain them in a better way. Now it's time for you to put your question. Question time, we have, I think, 45 minutes, so what do you say? Ah, yes, okay, we can, yes. Now it will be the question time, and for the question time, everybody is allowed to use his or her own language, French, Spanish, English, of course. So, I open the floor for the question. Who is willing to put the first question? Thank you. If it's in Spanish. Voilà. Thank you. No question? No. Don't tell me that. That would be terrible. Yes, okay. Could you just introduce yourself for the...
My name is Leti Fajardo. I come from Ecuador. I represent the UTA, the affected people, also by transnational. My question is, what is going to happen after today? Because what is going to happen after today? I see that Monsanto is still making big businesses in Africa, so it's pointing that side. So what we are going to do?
Okay, thank you very much. Maybe I will take 2 or 3 questions, and then we will share the question between us. Thank you for your question. Of course, it's a very important one. Another question? Yes, sir.
I am an organic farmer of the Netherlands, and I have seen what can happen in organic farming. And from my grandfather's own, in the city in Enkhuizen, where started Monsanto, the companies there before, there I lived. And so I have visited worldwide for advising in farming. And so I've been in Ecuador and in Asia. And the question is how we, with the power and the insight we have, can change worldwide food service organic. That is my question. And a good example I showed on the table and here, all you can eat some leaves from good, clean, grown flower bulbs too. That on the end we will serve that. And the question is how we can feel in our societies worldwide, but in every country is the problem, how we can change that. Positive.
Okay, thank you very much. A third one, and then we will see we among us is ready to reply. Okay, let's start with the 2 first questions. Okay, who is willing to reply to the first one or the second one? You? Let's go. Yeah.
Thank you, Madam President. I'm happy to share some thoughts on the first question. What is going to happen after today? And since you mentioned Ecuador, I think it provides the opportunity to speak about a very important initiative that has been carried forward by the government of Ecuador in conjunction with the government of South Africa that is intended to begin to close the accountability gaps that Stephen mentioned in his concluding remarks. The asymmetries in the mechanisms of protection of transnational corporations on the one hand and the weaknesses of the mechanisms for the protection of human rights on the other have led to worldwide mobilization of civil society that has come together in a so-called treaty alliance. This is a platform that is calling on the UN Human Rights Council to adopt a binding instrument that will secure the accountability of transnational corporations and other business entities in respect of human rights violations. So what happens from now onwards, this process is taking momentum. under, as I mentioned, the leadership of the governments of Ecuador and South Africa, a negotiating committee, an intergovernmental working group has been set up with a specific mandate to negotiate this instrument, to close these gaps and to secure accountability. For example, the notion of extraterritorial obligations could be articulated in this instrument, whereby the states and governments that allow these corporations to exist under its internal law, but then do not control them when they operate in other jurisdictions, in other countries, that dimension will be and should be addressed by this instrument. Similar initiatives are also taking place in individual countries. We have seen very recently legislation being adopted in France on due diligence, mandatory due diligence. And so this has come about, again, by the concerted articulation of civil society that is pushing for the closing of the accountability gaps. And so what's coming up after today? Further action, further mobilization, further need for civil society in order to continue to push to close these accountability gaps. Thank you.
It will be in Spanish.
Muchas gracias.
For you.
Sí.
Yes.
Muchas gracias. A propósito de la pregunta sobre de la compañera de Ecuador, ¿qué va a pasar después? Yo quisiera subrayar una o dos.
I would like to underline a couple of problems that the tribunal has. There has been a proposal of including the crime of ecocide as an international crime, and this would be very positive against Monsanto, because this enterprise would have to go slowlier, at least in other countries. There is another aspect. During the testimonies that we have heard, it was clear that in many countries, the audiences are very long, and this means that during the whole time that the court is working, those products that are damaging the environment are being used still. And then we could introduce a modification, asking that in the whole time during which the process would be going on, that those products would be forbidden to be used. And in Mexico, it has been possible to introduce this, while the Mexican court decides whether this product is damaging the mice in the way in which people is saying. The court has forbidden the use of these products. This is what is considered as a precautionary measurement, that's the measure that has been taken against these products. So the court decides first to start that those products are not to be used until the court has reached the final verdict. This is a tribunal of opinion, this one, but we hope that we would have some impact in slowing down the use of the products that Monsanto has, which are damaging the environment. It is necessary, as we have commented as well, as we have said as well, it is necessary that if there is research that is being done under the enterprise itself, that is being paid by the enterprise, is logical that it's not credible, the results. So it is very important that there would be independent research.
said? Okay, but I will, in 1 minute. Okay, thank you very much. Eleonora, would you like to, we are going to answer the two first questions, and then I will give the floor to you. Thank you. Yes?
I am going to reply the second question.
Okay.
If you don't mind, I'm going to reply in Spanish. It's fine with you? Bueno, relativo.
Okay. Regarding your question about what is it that we could do to promote those organic crops, there is an interesting proposal would be to study the things that are taking place in some countries in Latin America, in which they are making it impossible to have a patent on the seeds. Since it is not possible to have a patent on seeds, it is also not possible to have a patent on organic genetic modified crops. And people is constructing a reserve, keeping the natural seeds in a sort of bank. And this is happening in many countries in Latin America. And then the people is promoting to protect those seeds.
So, would you like to say something, Stephen?
No.
Not for the time being? Okay. Joe? Okay. Your question. Let's go.
My name is Regina Schwarz.
Je m'appelle Regina Schwarz, je suis journaliste indépendante. Et j'ai une question portant sur des procès qui ont eu lieu contre des entreprises comme
für diese deutsche Firma VW.
Et qui donc portait atteinte à l'environnement
et
la pollution de l'air. Et cette entreprise a donc été traînée en justice aux États-Unis. Ils doivent maintenant payer 4 milliards.
Ausgegeben. Und für mich ist das als
C'est un exemple qu'il existe des possibilités de procès internationaux contre des grandes entreprises. Donc, je ne comprends pas pourquoi c'est si compliqué avec Monsanto. Et une seconde question. Alors, c'est toujours difficile d'accuser, on dit, des entreprises privées. Par exemple, s'il s'agit d'une petite entreprise qui fait une erreur, si un électricien fait quelque chose, une erreur chez moi, eh bien, ils doivent avoir une assurance. Et après, il y a une poursuite judiciaire. Donc, là encore, il y a des exemples. Et puis après aussi, pour les procès de Nuremberg, pour autant que je sache, là aussi, il y avait des procédures contre des entreprises. Alors, pourquoi est-ce que c'est si difficile avec Monsanto? Voilà ma question. Il y a encore d'autres questions? Oui, monsieur. En quelle langue vous allez parler?
Ich werde in Spanisch sprechen. Mein Name ist Paulo Andrés Suárez.
Part of the I come from Colombia, and first of all, I would like to thank your opinion. Thank you for your opinion. That would be of a big help for the communities of indigenous people in Colombia, because they are suffering a lot with those glyphosates which are being thrown through the air and also directly on the soils. I refer the government of Colombia stopped the spread of glyphosate, but recently there has been some institutional that is being used again because there are some organisms of the government which are well, disregarding the prohibition. So my question is, how would this opinion that you just shared with us, how could we use it to put pressure into the Colombian government so that they would stop this aspersion of glyphosate, which is not only affected coca, but also other crops?
Thank you very much. Merci bien. A third question? Let's go. And then we will...
Thank you to the judges. I will speak in my own language, which is French. Je suis professeur Serralini.
I'm Professor Serralini. I've been working for 15 years on Monsanto products with research that's independent from the companies that make these products, independent from Monsanto. With Corinne Lepage, our former environment minister, we did this work more than 15 years ago. You have spoken of the problem of the lobbies that work against the whistleblowers and these lobbies that work for these companies. We in our team were the victims of this. We won quite a few defamation trials, and I was also witness of a trial that Monsanto did against the German company, the German government. It was in order to get the raw data. And anyway, we were able to get the raw data. And I'm really struck by the fact that your conclusions, of course, are limited by the debate surrounding glyphosate and the debate surrounding science. The experience in this field shows that there is a lack of transparency of the data which have allowed the approval of these products. And yes, this data exists, and so normally it should be made public according to the law. The data on the health and on GMOs should be made public, and this is what this case in appeal in Munster showed. And yet this is not respected by the law, and I think that if this was respected, it would really make it easier to have more transparency and to have the crime of ecocide. For instance, Roundup, the pesticide that's the most used in the world. Nobody was able to have exactly the data which have helped authorize Roundup. And so we only base ourselves on the data of glyphosate, which was used long-term on rats. However, we were able to prove that Roundup contained hidden components that were much more toxic than so in the same way that Monsanto already hidden dioxin in the Agent Orange, there's arsenic and other petrol-based products that are much more toxic than glyphosate in Roundup. So this means that glyphosate is actually, it's not true that it's the active principle of Roundup. And this is what makes it possible to carry on all these debates between the World Health Organization and others. Because, in fact, it's not glyphosate that they're judging, it's Roundup. So it's these tests with glyphosate which maintain this whole confusion created by Monsanto. So this means that the absence of transparency on the long-term tests and the absence of the declarations on the true active principles maintain a situation which creates this scientific confusion. And so I think it must be possible for a tribunal of judges like yours to have an opinion on the requirement of the transparency of these tests that enable the approval of the products. And this would, amongst other, make it possible to prove the totality of these lies that are hiding crimes against humanity. Thank you.
Georg? No? Jörg? Okay. First question, why is it so complicated? That's for you, Steve. Yeah.
You know, I do know something about these issues, and but I haven't spoken because I don't have good answers for you. You know, I'm a civil litigator, and I've litigated with Monsanto. You know, we represented the interveners in the Hershey-Smizer case, and we lost the battle to exclude from patent rights seeds in Canada. I get approached routinely by organic producers in Canada. Right now, they're very concerned about the fact that Monsanto is selling Roundup-ready alfalfa. So alfalfa is hay. So if you're an organic producer of meat, hay is an important ingredient. And you can't maintain organic certification if your products are contaminated with genetically modified organisms. But when it comes to pulling the trigger on litigation, which is really the only option available to those producers now because government has already acted to approve this particular substance, it's just very, very difficult. You know, a trial that took on these essential questions of safety, impacts on biodiversity, would be extremely difficult and very expensive. Even if you get help from, you know, pro bono lawyers, it would be a long, drawn-out, expensive, and arduous struggle. I do that kind of work. But you need an organized constituency that's going to be there for the years this litigation takes and to raise you know, the very significant sums of money that are going to be required in order to prosecute it seriously. And what's happened with, you know, there was a class action in Saskatchewan. I think there have been class actions in the United States going after Monsanto because of the polluting characteristics of genetically modified organisms and all the ways that they interact with the environment and pollute it. But they weren't well organized. They weren't well enough financed. You know, it's an answer I hesitate to offer you. The answer is more organization by people who are really concerned about these issues. There are a lot of organic producers in North America, for example, which is where I come from, but they're not organized. A lot of them are making money. Litigation could be funded. Farmers, I find, having been one myself, are a difficult group to organize. They're all petit bourgeoisie. They're all easily distracted, and they all have a lot of work to do, particularly during growing season. And that was one of the problems with representing them, is they would disappear in April. They wouldn't return until November. Well, the litigation process continues during those months. So these are just the practical difficulties of taking it on. Not that it's not possible. It's something I would love to do, but when people ask me whether I'll take on their cases and offer to give me a check for $10,000 or $20,000, I said, no. I mean, you have to understand how much of an effort this would require in order to be undertaken seriously. And so, you know, I'd litigate, but I consider litigation the last resort. That's what you do when everything else fails. So intervening in trying to influence public opinion and use the media and get governments to take a more of a regulatory role, I was thrilled to hear Marcos describe, you know, the initiative of Ecuador and South Africa. There has been successful litigation. The tribunal did hear about it in Mexico, and I believe in the Philippines as well. There have been some successful cases. So this isn't impossible to do, but people really have to get organized around initiatives like that and really be committed to them. I wish I had a better answer for you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Good answer. York? Take the floor, yes? Or do it.
Rápidamente comentarios.
The comments, a couple of quick comments. In the processes with Monsanto, it's very difficult to get on court with them. Monsanto is very powerful and has the capacity to influence the processes in a very strong way. And the legal defense implies as well that not only the work, the juridic work, the judicial work, but also the organization of the people who has been affected by the acts which are being judged. What the Colombian companion said is, I was speaking about the fact that in Mexico the products cannot be used while the judges are deciding, but the workmen who are the workmen have to take care that the neighbors are not using it as well. So it is we have to work on the public opinion so that people is not using it while it is forbidden by the court.
We have limited ourselves almost exclusively to glyphosate. This is something that has been explained in the investigation. When we investigated, we got all the testimonies, all the documents, and not only did we have the problem that it is quite difficult, well, let's say it is difficult, that it could be completely free. It has limitations. We cannot diffuse it. Very often there are wide investigations, but it's very difficult to let people know about it because the companies work in two ways. They limit investigation in its content, and also they limit especially the fact to spread the news. And that makes it very, very difficult to get all these scientific data as a result from investigation. That's extremely limited. It's something that you almost couldn't believe, but very often the judges cannot change this. I would like to insist on something else that has been said. This opinion has parts that we have taken from the testimonies and the diagnosis and also the worries of some people to include the crimes and also the luck or the fate of certain cases that we have been commenting right here. Here, another one in Spanish. I would like to add something to my Colombian colleague, referring to what Stephen was saying. We are an opinion tribunal. And this organization that has really, that Stephen has stressed very much, the way we need to organize, that's the way we as a society could confront all these things. The people who have presided in this tribunal have really promoted changes. We think this is also a tribunal that could promote changes, but it's also on the basis of the organization of society as a whole. Thank you.
Solo para elaborar también, plantea la pregunta sobre.
Again, Spanish, about the question about Colombia. I remember the question, how was the implementation in Colombia? We have received quite some testimonies during the hearings. The testimonies sometimes were from people who not only had a focus on eradicating the illicit crop, the called illicit crop like coca. That's something that doesn't make sense, of course, because of the traditional role these plants have in the Andean cultures and Amazon cultures, but also crop that doesn't have anything to do with coca, like cacao. These are really badly designed plants and badly applied plants that, in fact, give problems to the communities. It forces the communities to leave the territories. They are forced to use their natural resources. They lose hope, and they can't use their land anymore. And these subjects have brought, in fact, have been brought in front of the International Criminal Court, because that is a missed war against drug in Colombia that has had other repercussions. And we ended up with a treaty between two countries. Colombia is not only involved now in giving reimbursement, but they have committed themselves to participate in this war. All these treaties and all the challenges also have their problems. I think we have to construct peace with the respect of the rights of the people who defend and the human rights, and how these people want to defend themselves, how their environment is respected, how they get access to justice, like in the Rio Declaration. All this is very fundamental. Also the right to food, the right to water, the right to a healthy environment. All this have been concerns of this tribunal. And also what we could do right now with these opinions is to help. These opinions are in your hands right now. Please use them to make another step towards this paradigm of reconciliation, of creating peace in Colombia. Thank you very much.
Utiliser, voilà, c'est tout à fait important ce que vous. Pour le sens de votre message, c'est que.
Hacerlo. Y porque lo que ha dicho de la cuestión de la investigación científica ha sido una cuestión crucial. De intimidación y así, pero todo lo que usted ha estado diciendo es muy importante y hay que ver que
because we really have to see further to try to understand where exactly the problem is. We have to make sure that we have very important expertise. So thank you for your question.
Are you? Ladies first. She's on the first row. Okay. Et ça va être it will be the last round of questions because we have to finish at 5. So.
Bonjour, je ne vais pas prendre trop de temps aux autres personnes.
I'm Ime Gaya. I'm a law teacher. I would just like to bring up an idea with you. As you just said, we heard a lot about intimidation and about MOs that really made me think of a type of of harassment that doesn't really exist. We are sort of the different types of harassments that are described in the law. But now I see this sort of asymmetry that is systematically used by a company towards, maybe a small farmer or a researcher. And this is just an idea I wanted to bring up, this new type of asymmetric harassment.
Professor Michel Pimbert from the Coventry University. Thank you for your opinion. It's very valuable. But I really would like to ask a point of clarification. Is there any evidence thus far that corporations have used the investor dispute settlement mechanism to limit the freedom of scientists to do their work? That's my question. And if so, could you comment on the possible implications for the other areas of human rights that you have examined in your work?
Thank you. A third one? Yes? Je pensais que... Okay.
I have two questions. I would like to know how your advisory opinion can be used in countries like Argentina or Sri Lanka, where the people are suffering so much and don't know what they can do to stop their suffering. And second question to Mr. Orellana, you spoke about ecocide, and there is a big debate right now about the possible reauthorization of glyphosate-based herbicide in the US or in Europe. And to what extent could we say that glyphosate is a tool of ecocide if this crime would be recognized?
Thank you. Thank you very much. I understand your question. No, because, yes, it's your turn. And it will be the last one, I'm sorry. But we have time after after this meeting, then we can discuss that also around a glass of water.
Thank you. Can I ask in German? Okay. Mein Name ist Christine Zembol, ich bin Juristin. Ich kenne das Problem.
I know the problem with scientific judges waar it's very interesting that you really lay a stress on the scientific freedom. How can we get to the point that lawyers who have to decide if the advisory opinions are bought? That's the one question. And the other question is, how can we solve the big problem if people who suffer of Monsanto's systems say, and Monsanto says, no, it's not our problem. It's not our fault.
He urged me to finish at 5, but then he wanted another question. That's good. Let's go.
Je vais être très court, excusez-moi, c'est une question de néo...
I will be very short. So I've just discovered your advisory opinion, and reading it as a layperson of the public, could we deduce from your opinion that states are not doing their jobs when they let corporations violate human rights? Could we consider that states that would want it could now use your advisory opinion to stop some of these activities in the name of human rights, and that if they don't do it, could your opinion help drag these states before the court for lack of respect or for having human rights respected.
Thank you, Madam Chair. If I could first address the question of an expanding system of investor-state dispute settlement. There is evidence that corporations are using these privileges in increasing numbers. There are cases involving intellectual property rights, which sets the stage, for example, for attacks on academic freedom and the like. Investigative journalists that have won the Pulitzer Prize in the United States have documented how ISDS is now also being used by criminals to avoid prosecution. There are cases in Egypt in this regard. There are a number of cases where corrupt businesses have also invoked ISDS to avoid investigations. And so we begin to see an abuse of ISDS, which was originally conceived as a protection for investors, but is now aggressively being used by investors to undermine democratic processes. Perhaps the most troubling of these is the loss of regulatory space of the state for the protection of health, safety, and the environment, where scientists around the world are alerting us that the international community as a whole, the planet, is facing unprecedented risk in terms of planetary boundaries, and that states should adopt measures as a matter of urgency to steer course to ensure that economic activity stays within the realm of these planetary boundaries. ISDS is being used to attack those measures that are deemed necessary for humanity to maintain a safe planet that can secure the dignity of present and future generations. So this expanding system is certainly a cause for concern. That in terms of ISDS. In terms of the question of on ecocide and whether glyphosate or Roundup more generally can be considered a tool of ecocide. I think it's worth recalling, Madam Chair's, your exposition of question 5, where the advisory opinion documents how the use of Agent Orange, produced by Monsanto in partnership with other corporations, was used by the United States as a defoliant in its war against Vietnam over the course of many years. So this was not a one-off situation. It was a systematic practice that took place over the course of a number of years, and it wasn't just a tiny little bit of Roundup. It was, well, you mentioned the figures, and so I don't want to venture into the specific statistics there in the advisory opinion, but they are large volumes. So these thresholds of widespread, severe, long-lasting, causing serious damage provide an indicator of whether a specific substance can be considered a tool of ecocide. In the specifics of glyphosate and Roundup, it is becoming increasingly clear, as also articulated by Eleonora, that the research is indicating its carcinogenic potential and that the room for debate, for legitimate scientific debate, is now over. And so where the systematic worldwide use and marketing of a product that is known to be a carcinogen, that is known to have negative effects on biodiversity, is continuously used in the knowledge that it produces serious damage, in the knowledge that it affects negatively the ecosystems that provide subsistence, then there is a credible case that could be made in order to investigate these issues further. The last thing I'll say is that ecocide up to now is a political term because it is not yet recognized in international law. But as one of the questions pointed out, the Nuremberg trials also show that international law can evolve and does evolve to meet the growing conscience of humanity. And once a problem is identified, civil society are articulated can affect change. And so it may be a question of time until international law evolves and recognizes ecocide as an indispensable legal tool to safeguard the most basic values that underlie the planet. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Eleonora?
Bueno, en cuanto a la pregunta,
in relation to the question how this opinion could be used in Argentina, I have 4 important points that I could think of in Argentina. These points are guaranteed in the Constitution of Argentina, even the right to a good environment. And also very good is that the prevention or precaution is important in Argentinian legislation. It's macro environment legislation. For example, in relation to the second point, in relation to the leaf phosphate usage, Argentina is a federal country. Every province or region has regulated this. But the autonomous city of Buenos Aires has prohibited the use of lisophosphates in public places. So it doesn't say anything about private places. You can see it as something good, but it should be deepened a little bit more. A third point that could be of use with this consultative opinion, also in Argentinian Congress, these points are treated in relation to the effects that an analysis that a specific tribunal could do, what effect that could have. And then all that we've been talking about here could be applicable. And also the last point that would be relevant in Argentina would be this important law in relation to patents known as the Monsanto law. This project has a system that's agro-industrial, and it's like an exception in such a way that certain persons who are in a certain register, who are registered somewhere, they could have access. Of course, we're talking about rules and exceptions, and at one point the rule will become an exception and the other way around. In this way, it is possible to eliminate the other system. I think this consultative opinion could really consist of an important contribution as far as Argentina is concerned. Okay. Entonces, voy a dar la palabra a todos.
Je voudrais intervenir très rapidement.
I just wanted to comment on one legal aspect, and especially what Arnaud, I think, mentioned it before, the responsibility of states. I think this is a real crucial question. I think that as long as we don't realize that the states are sort of involved in they've signed regional conventions, etc., with the protection of the environment. And I think when states don't want to take their responsibility, well, this causes problems. And I think, I don't know how we can do this. This is just an idea I'm throwing out there. But we really have to highlight this responsibility of the states. You cannot sign regional, international obligations and then refuse to apply them. I think that's the first point, and it's up to civil society, it's up to the international community to make sure that these conventions are applied. The second point I wanted to comment upon is that international law is being developed all the time, and I think that if we want these big companies to be punished, and I mean, we saw this in October. There's a lot of collaboration between these companies and these governments, which these governments are often sort of complicit. And so I think that to arrive at the sentencing of these companies, international law must be developed. And this concept of ecocide, I really believe in it. When we suggest that it be integrated into the Statute of Rome in a separate article, but in the Statute of Rome, I think it's an excellent thing, because in the Rome Statute, whether it be Article 7 or Article 8, you have, under all of these articles, we see all the time these major attacks against the environment and against the physical and moral integrity of the population. So I think this is work that really needs to be done. We have to look at this proposal of text on ecocide, see what its substantive elements are, and then see what strategies we can set up to make sure that this company, and even the states, because when you look at the Rome Statute, the problem we had with the question number 5 is that we had the Article 8 of the Rome Statute, which said that for war crime, you cannot prosecute a state and a moral person. So I think that what we asked is that legal persons, so companies, can also be prosecuted for these awful crimes that are being carried out against humanity, and war crimes and so forth. I really wanted to focus our attention on this lobbying that we need to do. We're all involved. Of course, I know Senegal, but other people also came to bear witness. But I think that they are increasingly, moving towards towards Africa. So I think that yes, we have to be really vigilant, but we really have to engage the responsibility of states. Thank you so much for this strong message. It's really very important. I'll come back to this question of the responsibility of states, because I really share your opinion and I have an idea on how to implement it.
Bien, yo quisiera que...
Yes, I would like to make this sharp. A great part of this judicial opinion has been based on what the witnesses have said during the hearings. I'm saying this especially in relation to the question of the professor. I don't know whether I understood him well about the pressure and the limitations in relation to investigation for the scientists to do their work. You can see this in the written text. No, it's not like that? Okay, at least there was 5 or 6 opinions of scientists, one from Canada, one from England, one from Germany, and 2 or 3 more. All of them testified about the pressure that limited them in doing their research freely. There are indicators also from a judge from California. Eleonora was already saying this. He was talking about the doubts in relation to the investigations of the scientists, of the research of the scientists. Yes, we can confirm this. Yes, definitely there is pressure from the side of the companies that the results of all these researches from the scientists, that the results are all positive or favorable towards the company. It has been said about the asymmetry or the difference between the human rights and the rights of the companies. I think this is an important point. The tribunal has said that in general, during the court cases, both national and international, human rights should prevail above corporate rights. And now it's the other way around. And this is a very important point. What Dior has said, the states are not taking their responsibilities to defend human rights. And here, we should, especially from the side of the tribunals, we should really do our job, do a good job, and really make the human rights prevail above the corporate rights. This is something we can say quickly. And then there is another point. This takes me to another point about the scientific tests that our colleague from Germany was talking about. Normally speaking, at least in my country, when there are two scientific opinions that do not coincide, that are opposing, then the judge should find a third opinion. And this is a problem that we have seen in the what was testified. Very often it's something you couldn't count on because there could be, or there is, sometimes a lack of research centers that really are dependable, that are not influenced by either of the two sides, and that you can really count on the results. This is a very important point that we as a tribunal have established. And of course, the states still need to do a lot. They need to develop a lot of activities for the states to comply with their duty to defend human rights. Maybe the colleagues could use all these opinions to develop the responsibilities that states should take so that they could comply with the necessities of civil society. Thank you very much. Okay. Okay.
After the meeting, you will be asked to...
I'll keep talking.
Okay, d'accord. So, voilà, nous sommes au bout. We are at the end of our, I should say, afternoon. We are at the end of the presentation of this advisory opinion. So, I should say that the mission of the tribunal is completed. It's over now. It's over, and now, as usual, this opinion, this advisory opinion is in your hands. It's you to use it. You as NGO, as civil servant, as lawyer, as judge, to use if it's possible for you to use this opinion. For us, we have done, I should say, our best. The questions were very important, very difficult sometimes. So we tried to put some lines, some guidelines. And the most important thing that I think for this tribunal is first, as we said in the beginning, to alert public opinion. Because if we are not alert, if we don't know that there is a problem there, of course, it's impossible to solve it. The second point is to maybe we will see, but we have to be patient for that. Maybe this opinion will serve the development of international law. And of course, international law does evolve under the impetus of society, that's for sure. So, but for that, maybe we have to wait 1 year, 2 years, 10 years, decades, century, I don't know. But we still have to have hope that it's possible. And the last point, I think, well, that's for me the most important point. Alerting to contribute to the progress of international law and to give some tools for people who think that it's necessary to make corporations accountable for the respect of human rights, environment, and also, I should say, more for the democratic society, which is at the end of the picture. Voilà. So that's what I have to say. Our job is over. our common job is over. We will continue in another capacity to do that. And I would like to thank you very, very much, my dear colleague judge, because they made an extraordinary job. And it was difficult because it was across continent, across expertise. So, and well, at the end of the day, voila, we are just in. Thank you very much for all of you. Thank you, Marcos, because Marcos, 10 minutes ago. Okay. 10 minutes, no. 10 days ago, he was in the hospital, okay? So he didn't know, but it's true. Marcos was in the hospital and he was here to help. So for me, it was so important. My dear interpreters, without you, we were lost. So really, thank you very much for your help. It was really a bubble tower here, and you did an extraordinary job, and I really would like to thank you and to give a big round of applause. Oh, oh, thank you. That's German flower. Thank you very much. Ça, c'est trop mignon, le tulipe. Thank you. It couldn't be more Dutch flower. That's exactly Dutch flower from here. The report are there.
I will present all the young men and enthusiastic men from the organization. For you.
Messi, I think the report is on the table. That's it? Okay, so the full report is there. What do you say? Okay. Great, thank you. So the last version of the report is there with the executive summary, the resume. Okay, très bien. So, thank you very much and bye-bye. Bye-bye.
But she forget? She forget, huh?
No, she said.
Oh, okay.
She said. Yeah.
It was
it's
very
okay.
fast.
Yeah.